Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today this video we're going to discuss the most important updates that we received during the previous night. And to tell the truth, there were a lot of updates, a lot of very interesting updates. First we're going to start with the south, with the Black Sea. The Russians reported that they started controlling and inspecting every single ship that is heading in direction of Rostov-on-Don. Some sources are saying that the Russians managed to discover and to arrest a boat, a ship that was fully loaded with explosion. The Russians are saying that that ship first left somewhere the area in the vicinity of Romania and Odessa, while the Ukrainians had this possibility. They entered the Turkey, and after that the entire crew was changed. The ship was fully loaded with explosion, and after that that ship started movement in direction of Rostov-on-Don. So this is a very terrible situation. It's even difficult to imagine what kind of consequences the situation could lead if the ship arrives at Rostov-on-Don. Now let's talk about Crimea. The Russians reported that during the previous night they managed to repel and discover at least a few attacks. The Ukrainians were planning to make few attacks with the drones. The Russians are saying that there were at least 14 drones that were attacking Crimea, and 11 of them was damaged and destroyed somewhere in the vicinity of the Black Sea, above the Black Sea, and the 3 of them was shut down and fell down on the vicinity of Crimea. Furthermore, the Ukrainians made another missile attack with the Storm Shadow, as I understand. As a result of that attack, they managed to destroy the ammo depot in the vicinity of Jankoy. There was a very heavy explosion, and the Russians are saying that they have already stopped any movements of the trains between Crimea and Kherson area, with Crimea and the mainland. That all the trains that goes through these areas, you can see there is like a real railroad that goes through the settlement. The explosion took place very close to this area, and the Russians have already announced the evacuation of the civilians in 5-kilometer zone of the area of the explosion. So this is the third explosion, third ammo depot that the Russians have lost since the previous 7 days, and this is a very big losses for the Russians. Those ammo depots the Russians were planning to use to support their forces in the Kherson area, in the Zaporozhye area, to repel the Ukrainian attacks. Now they have lost 3. And currently we see that the Russians haven't found a solution how to shut down the Ukrainians' missiles and probably Storm Shadows. Probably they are really invisible for the Russian air defense. They need to do something. Furthermore, the Russians and Ukrainian sources published another drone attack in direction of Reni. This is the farthest probably port on the territory of Ukraine. This port is located almost on the border with Romania and Moldova. And on this video we see how the Ukrainians was trying to shut down the missile drone with the air defense, but it didn't help them. The Russians managed to bypass this territory and to attack with the drone. And this is the port that Ukrainians are using on the river of Dunai to continue like their grain situation, to continue receiving ammo depot using the fleet. So the ships are getting to this area, and then they're moving along Dunai river and getting to the Reni port. But this very interesting attack, because as you can see, this port is located very far, and this port is located somewhere in the vicinity of the NATO countries, very close to the NATO countries and to the borders of the NATO countries. Basically, the Russians demonstrated their will and demonstrated they are not afraid of anything, and furthermore, the Russians demonstrated their possibilities, that they can get and attack any point of Ukraine without any problems and without any being afraid of any consequences from anybody, including NATO countries. It was a very interesting situation, because this port is located very far, and to get this area you need to attack using a very interesting direction of your movements of the drone. Now we're moving to Zaporozhye area, and during the previous night we got more updates from the Bradley Square. We got a lot of very interesting video and photo and so on. The Russians that were attacking the Ukrainians all over this territory. They were attacking the Ukrainians in the vicinity on the western flank, and there was a drone attack on the Ukrainian machine gun positions. And as you can see, as a result of that attack, we see that basically this area is under Ukrainian control. So that's why I have updated the map and show that the Russians moved a little bit to the west of this area. Furthermore, the Russians published another video how they were bombing and shelling the Ukrainians on their move to the south. During the previous week, as we discussed, the Ukrainians were completely concentrated and focused on the creation of the bridgehead in this area, and they were trying to demine this area and to prepare a lot of, as much as possible, square kilometers for the next movements of the armored vehicles. And after that, the Ukrainians launched a lot of convoys of armored vehicles, tanks, Leopards, Bradleys, T-64, T-72, a lot of waves of infantry. And as you can see, according to the geography of the icons, we see that Ukrainians managed to get to the very south of Robotyne, but they haven't entered the settlement. They're just trying to bypass this settlement on the east side of, but as soon as the Ukrainians stretch their attack orders, because as you can see, like, the distance is very huge from Novodanilovka to the southern area of Robotyne, the Russians launched a significant number of drones, and after that we start receiving a lot of videos how the Russians were attacking and bombing the Ukrainians on their way to the south with Lancet drones. On this video we see how the Russians was trying to attack and destroy Challenger with Lancet. We understand that probably this Leopard tank is very armored, so according to the author of that video, the Russians used at least 2 or 3 drones to attack, and after that the Ukrainians were forced to leave the Leopard because probably the tank wasn't destroyed, but the tank was damaged. Maybe the the gun of the tank was damaged, so that's why the Ukrainians took a decision not to use the tank anymore, and they started movement like on their feet. We got more updates in the vicinity of Robotyne. As you can see, there are a lot of armored vehicles, Bradleys, tanks that managed to get almost the settlement. So there was like just a few 100 meters in front of Robotyne, and the Ukrainians have almost entered even the settlement. Yet we haven't received any updates whether the Ukrainians were able to do this or not. But we see that the Russians were using drones and FVP drones massively to stop and to slow down the Ukrainians as much as possible. As I understand, because we haven't received any updates about any progress of the Ukrainians in Robotyne itself, or south of Robotyne, or midline of Robotyne, as I understand, the Ukrainians were basically defeated in that attempt. And furthermore, the Russians published the video how they managed to capture completely repaired and malfunctional Bradley, with the most probably modern, most armored, or something like this. This is the Bradley from outside, and the Russians managed to capture and of course evacuate this Bradley to the territory, to the mainland. Furthermore, the Russians were using helicopters to slow down and to attack the Ukrainian offensive orders. On this video we see how the Russians managed to destroy the Ukrainian Leopard tank, and at least the author of this video reported that on this video we can see the process of destroying of Ukrainian Leopard. So that was a very terrible night for the Ukrainians. The Russians, as I understand, managed to repel the Ukrainian attacks. But anyway, the question is, what was the purpose of the Ukrainians? If the purpose of the Ukrainians was to develop their bridgehead as far as possible to the south between, let's say, Robotyne and Verbova, just to split this territory in 2 parts, and let's say if the main purpose of the Ukrainians was to capture this territory, to develop and to make another step in the direction of Tokmak, let's say this one, we can say that maybe the Ukrainians who were paying such a heavy price managed to do this. Probably, if this was their goal of their attack. If we're talking that, if we're saying that Ukrainians' purpose was to capture Robotyne or something like this, of course they were defeated. So it's very difficult to determine about the results of this operation, because currently we don't know the objectives and the goals of the Ukrainians. At some point, as I understand, maybe that operation was successful, but maybe from another point of view that was another suicide operation implemented by the Ukrainian side with the heaviest losses since the beginning of the greatest counter-offensive operation from the Ukrainian side. Very interesting updates are coming from Gulay-Polya, from this area, probably for the first time since the beginning of the greatest Ukrainian counter-offensive operation. The Ukrainians launched a massive attack from Gulyai-Polskaya in direction of Dorozhnyanka. And this is the first evidence of such a heavy attack. Before that, the Ukrainians mainly were using reconnaissance teams, and maybe there was reconnaissance in combat and so on. And today there was a real attack. This night there was a real attack. At the evening of the previous day, and the Russians managed to repel, but probably the Ukrainians will make another attempt to attack in this direction, in direction of Pologi. This operational direction is Pologi. We haven't received any updates from Vremivka tactical bridgehead. Haven't received any updates from Donetsk and so on. Just another geolocated video of another Ukrainian attempt to concentrate their forces on the north of Krasnogorovka, and the Krasnogorovka that located on the north of Avdiivka. So the Ukrainians continue regrouping, and probably the Ukrainians within the next few days are planning to restart their offensive operation to the south of Krasnogorovka, and they will try to return positions that they've lost during the battle of this week. I'm talking about the positions on the edge of Krasnogorovka and Veselaya. We yet haven't received any updates from Klishchiivka. There is sources are saying that the Ukrainians have already entered the Klishchiivka, the settlement itself, and furthermore the Ukrainians managed to eat and take control over the gray zone, over the positions in front of Andreevka. So basically, as of today, if there are going to be clashes, today we are going to see the clashes for the settlements itself, not for the hills, not for the fortifications around the settlements like Klishchiivka, Andreevka, but for the settlements itself. And I'll remind you that from the Russian side there are special units Akhmat, there are 72nd Motorized Brigade, 57th Motorized Brigade, and from the Ukrainian side there are 24th Separate Battalion Aidar, 5th Assault Brigade, 22nd Mechanized, 80th Assault and 3rd Assault Brigade. So we'll see who will win this battle. Now we're moving to the north, and we have more updates we received during the previous night about the bridgehead in Karmazinovka. Some Russian sources are saying that as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to develop their bridgehead to the west from Novoyegorovka, and as a result of that attack they managed to establish control over a small village Sverdlovka. This village is located on the west of Novoyegorovka. So for now I'm not updating this map because we need more evidence, or at least more reliable sources who can confirm this information, but according to some sources the Russians entered this territory. Furthermore, the Russians reported that as a result of fierce fightings in this area, the Ukrainians made at least 13 attempts to return their lost positions. All those attacks were repelled by the Russians. Furthermore, the Russians managed to capture 40 prisoners of war. For now, we see that the Ukrainians haven't found a solution how to stop the Russian advances, and we yet haven't received any reliable information of results of Russian offensive operation in direction of Nadia and small village Sergeyevka. So this area, this northern flank of this bridgehead, still covered with the fog of war, and it's very difficult to understand what did happen there during the previous night and whether the Russians were able to storm and capture this territory or not. I believe they were able, or at least they would complete this mission today. The Ukrainians and the Russians continue their fightings in the vicinity of Kislovka and Kotlarovka. The Russians published a video how they bombed and shelled the Ukrainian positions in the small settlement Kislovka. They destroyed the Ukrainian stronghold and so on. So basically the Russians are trying to not to reduce the pressure on the northern flank, on the central flank, I believe, of Kupiansk front line, trying to keep Ukrainian stress and trying to keep as much as possible reserves in this area, because the Russians need to complete and to continue their offensive operation in Karmazinovka, and this is the reason they need to keep and to pin down the Ukrainians' reserves on the real Kupiansk front line and of course on Liman front line, and not to allow them to send reserves to the central part, to Karmazinovka. This is very important, this is a vital question for the Russians. Also, the Ukrainians during the previous night made another terrorist attack. It's at least the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation called that attack of the terrorist. So this night, the previous night of the local time, the Ukrainians sent few drones to attack Moscow, and some of the residential area, some buildings in the residential area were attacked by the Ukrainian drones, but according to official piece of information we have, there were no casualties among civilians, so everything just damage to the buildings and so on. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.